Good evening. Tonight, the principal target is immigration. Immigration scams, immigration rackets, immigration corrections, perhaps. But first, here's Ted with the rundown.
More with the best of Webster. It's back to the 26th of November, 1984, with Dr. Helen Caldicott.
The new weapons that are being built by America and Canada will, if we don't stop them, make nuclear war a mathematical certainty. When? I can't say.
But first, last year's onslaught of 155 Tamils left adrift in the Atlantic prompted severe changes in Canada's immigration policies. This week, a bomb blamed on Tamil terrorists exploded in a crowded Sri Lankan bus station, killing close to 100 people. What measures are taken to ensure Canada won't become a refuge for terrorists? In the studio with Webster, Gerry Weiner, Minister of State for Immigration.
I'm going to give you a chance, Mr. Weiner, to tell me what a mess and what chaos was caused in our immigration plans and department by your predecessors.
Jack, I took over a situation which indeed was chaotic. We had thousands of people coming to our shores, all claiming to be refugees. We know that some 40,000 came in a 5-year period. We had a very liberal determination system. After all the levels of review and re-review, where 1 out of 3 are real refugees, the rest are non-bona fide claimants, we've only removed about 650. It meant that you were able to come in through the back door even if you didn't meet the criteria to be an immigrant to this country.
And so now you're going to you gave an amnesty of some kind recently to 18,000 people, of whom a very small proportion were refugees.
Well, we don't call it an amnesty. We did an administrative review. We tried to establish criteria that were fair, family, social, and economic, and humanitarian, and compassionate. And if they were of good character and good medical, we allowed them to stay.
Let me use the word amnesty. What are the numbers going to be in your next amnesty? 17,000?
I don't have an amnesty. What I do have now is a fast-track system. Of course, what added to the chaos was we had a list of countries to which we did not remove people, so that if you were one of those people, like the Tamils who arrived by boat, you're instantly given a minister's permit, allowed to work for some future refugee determination. That was 10,000 of my 18,000. But I've got a lot of resources. I'm going to flush the system and make sure that everybody goes through the same process to see if they're a refugee.
Are you going to be the immigration minister who's going to tighten up and improve the qualifications for migrants who come to this country?
Disorder is unfair. Order is fair. My goal is to put in place a system that's fair. The system, in order to be fair, has to be realistic, not naive. We have to use some common sense.
But sir, how dare you refuse anyone who enters our gates claiming to be a refugee? That makes you somewhat to the right of Attila the Hun in today's climate.
Not everybody that comes is a refugee. We want our generosity to real refugees to go unabated. We'll spend millions of dollars helping refugees where they are. 20,000 we bring here. Other people that come here will always be open to that determination to see whether they're a refugee or not, but we need a quick, expeditious answer, and if they're not, return them to their country of origin and allow them to apply like all other immigrants in the proper line.
Any country of origin?
Absolutely.
Unless they can prove that they are bona fide refugees fleeing from some kind of terror.
A refugee is a personal fear of persecution. It's your own life, limb, or liberty that's at stake, not necessarily the country you come from. You'll have to demonstrate that fear to us.
But is it not a fact that most of the people you will be letting in, while they may well be good citizens in due course, are economic migrants?
Well, the vast majority of people that come are economic migrants, and that's why when
posing as refugees.
Absolutely.
But your department, and you can be blamed for this too, was terribly slow in acting in some obvious rackets, like the Turkish one.
We obviously knew about some of the private entrepreneurs that were bringing people. We have bilateral relations to consider.
They were conning these people for payments of money. They could get into Canada and stay there forever.
All of these innocent people that have been brought here did so because of the constraints of immigration policy. They figured out very quickly how to come here when you didn't meet the criteria. They had Canadians that helped them. These people have helped identify these Canadians. All of that information has been passed on to the RCMP. And let me tell you, the ball is now in somebody else's court that will close them down.
When one immigration officer, out of all conscience, reported outside of his immediate orbit the fact that people with criminal records were being let in, you fired them.
I didn't fire anybody. I'm not the administrator. The department is run by the deputy minister, and I would indicate to you that there are no criminals that are being allowed in. The streets of our community are as safe today as they ever were, and we do checks of character and criminality before anybody's let in.
Do you really?
Absolutely, sir.
On everybody who comes in?
Absolutely. Well, those that arrive, of course, by boat, we continue to monitor. We do the checks as quick as we can. And
yeah, now
the Tamils of last summer were certainly not criminals.
Before I come to your fast track, is it not a fact that it has been well established that once I place my feet on the soil of Canada, regardless of who I am or what I am, that I can manipulate the legal system and the appeals right up to federal court, taking many years.
That's the system, the cumbersome system that I took over. But what we're about to bring forward is a new refugee determination process. One that, as I said, will guarantee the determination of those in need of our protection. But the system has to have common sense. It has to be based on objective criteria, not subjective opinion.
But what the point I'm getting to is that if I'm going to the United States today, they can look at me and say, Webster, don't like your fat old Scotch face, and besides you've got a record as long as your arm, turn around and get out, correct? Do you plan to give that power back to Canadian immigration officers at the borders?
Jack, without trying to reveal all the parameters of the bill, I can assure you that the system will be simplified. It will give a quick, expeditious answer, and those that are deemed not to be a refugee, a real refugee, will know very, very quickly in a matter of days and weeks, and they'll then be returned to their country of origin to apply under the fair and just criteria that everybody else has to meet.
Now, I'm not talking about the legitimate ones, but about the other ones. Therefore, when they come into this country in the future, you are going to, in some way, hold them, correct?
Well, that would appear to be one of the processes, because if you come undocumented or with fraudulent documents...
Or if I've torn them my passport up in the aircraft and put it down the toilet, which is a well-known way of becoming a stateless person, right?
Absolutely. We're going to put order to the system, and we'll be at least credited with having maintained our two lines of continuing the generosity to refugees and of making sure that the immigrants, if we want more immigrants in the country, let's do it together, and let's do it with those criteria that everybody can meet.
But the criteria for refugees, or the criteria for family unification, doesn't require a person to be of a sufficient education as to be of assistance to the community, does it?
Well, we have a definition of a refugee that we've agreed to in concert with other nations, and we, the officers that work for us around the world, will be picking 20,000 refugees who, of course, they feel will be able to integrate and be successful in our society. The rest, those that come and knock at our door, the so-called refugees, of course, we'll have to observe very carefully, but we want to be sure we don't turn a real refugee away to face death or torture.
Now, in Britain, which of course suffered or received a vast amount of immigration from its former empire, they finally closed down family unification. What does family unification mean in this country? Does it mean that once one member of the family is here, mothers and fathers, siblings, fiancés can all come in as a matter of right?
In Canada, every person living in Canada has the right to sponsor their dependent children, their spouse, or their dependent parents over the age of 60. Mm-hmm. That's what we know as the family class.
Now, are you planning to expand? In fact, I saw a report that you are planning to redefine the family to include perhaps uncles, aunts, nieces, nephews?
No, what I said was the first course. We're in a consultation now to determine how many immigrants we would like to have next year and in future years. And I'll do that when I rise in Parliament in the month of June. Now, when we announce that number, whatever that number be, we will then build on all the categories. We were the government in January 1 of 1986 that opened the doors again to independent immigrants, which were closed down by the previous government.
Just a minute, let me get that.
January
it was almost impossible to get in from the UK or from Western Europe. Was that not correct?
That's correct, because they closed out the doors of Canada to the independent immigrant. Mm-hmm. We, in January 1 of 86, have now restored it. There are 119 skills where you do not need a relative or a certified job offer in your pocket. Mm-hmm. And of course, if you have language, you're given a lot of extra points. There's 10 points if you speak English out of the 70 points. So this opened the doors again to people from the Anglophone or Francophone
What do you feel the feeling in the country, not about refugees, whom I suspect are generally welcome because they're fleeing for their lives, but what do you feel is the public's reaction to all the dreadful chaos that has been in the immigration department?
I have a responsibility to indicate to Canadians how useful immigrants have been, how they've been helpful in creating jobs in this country.
No, I said chaos in your department.
I don't call that chaos.
You talked about chaos at the beginning.
I talk about a chaotic situation in the country.
Caused, of course, by the Liberals.
Well, it's not primarily. It just happens that they were in government through those years with the policies that were put in place. And now we have the obligation and the duty, no matter how painful it is, to put our house in order and put a system that's fair on the streets. I
think, to be not light-hearted, but I think the thing that caught the public's eye so sharply were the dearly beloved Tamils and the lifeboats. Now, that was comic opera, was it not?
Well, a couple of
And
boatfuls.
did you not play a part in the comic opera?
It was the straw that broke the camel's back. The part I played was, of course, there was a...
You said at once, they're welcome.
Well, we had a provision where if you came from one of those countries, the 18 countries, my only provision was to provide you with a minister's permit, give you a year in which to work and become a part of the Canadian society for some future refugee determination. Now, that was unfair. Of the 18,000 claims that came last year, 10,000 or more are now on minister's permits. If a refugee is a person of fear of persecution, it should be your individual case that should be examined to determine whether you're a refugee, not necessarily a blanket coverage for your country.
But the 10,000, of course, will become Canadians and be allowed to land properly because they're on ministerial permits.
No, when their year is up, they will then go back into the determination system that's in place and have a chance to demonstrate that they're refugees.
But that would be, not that I'm suggesting you do it, but it would be highly unpopular if you did that.
Well, I said to govern is my responsibility, and as painful as it would be, we want a system that's orderly. If together we want more immigrants in the country, let's build those numbers and then establish criteria that everybody can meet fairly and squarely.
Are you going to expand the independent immigration class to include those who can speak one or two of the official languages of the country?
Absolutely. Our goal, of course, is that by opening the independent immigrant categories and adding constantly to those categories, if we build the numbers of immigrants that come to this country to whatever level, we're going to open all of the categories to more.
Now, you've done a couple of other things. You've been quite forthright, which I find unusual in cabinet ministers, if I may say so. The transit visa business, that now works properly.
It's working very well.
Can I fly from Britain to here and back again without a transit visa?
You can fly from Britain anywhere because as a member of the United Kingdom or the most Commonwealth countries, you don't need a visa.
It's only from named countries.
We had about 98 countries that we exact visas from because citizens of those countries were, of course, bothering the integrity and credibility of our immigration and refugee laws. Now, those citizens also require in-transit visas. So it meant that those Chileans that left Santiago, went to Buenos Aires to board an airplane, purportedly to take a vacation in England, needed an in-transit visa because that airplane was going to stop in Montreal and Mirabel. And then when they found that out, they, of course, all were screaming that they wanted to make a refugee claim.
Because that had been their plan.
Of course.
And you let them into the country.
No way. We examined them thoroughly where they were. And finally, when one or two were deemed to be refugees by our own people, by our own definition, those were the ones that came. The rest can make applications like all other immigrants do to this country.
More questions from me and from you to Gerry Weiner, the Minister of State for Immigration, after the break. Can't remember, Mr. Minister, if you told me whether or not you were going to expand the family classification.
I was going to do it to all classes because once we announce our numbers in June, we would have to open up the business investors and entrepreneurs, the independent immigrants, and also if there are more members of the family class, they'll all have to fit across the
Are you going to wipe out the
boundaries.
Immigration Appeal Board?
Not at all. There's going to be a...
Jack, we have to start over again
I'm
in
sorry.
5 seconds.
Why? Did I hear you say, Mr. Minister, that you're going to wipe out the Immigration Appeal Board?
No, there will be a Convention Refugee Determination Board, an Immigration Appeal Board. All of these processes will be in place. I don't want to define their functions tonight because there'll be newly defined functions in the Act.
You're now talking about all the people who are under question in the country, under appeal. How many are there now in the country?
Well, the people that are here now under the old rules have to be treated old rules, but once the Act becomes law, then of course everybody is treated according to the new regulations that will be approved by Parliament.
There will be a form of Immigration Appeal Board.
Absolutely.
Now, entrepreneurs. I remember the Globe and Mail doing a very good series on a number who had come into the country and invested money, but nobody checked on them. And they were very difficult to find thereafter, having not supplied any of the promised jobs or like that.
We issued
How does it work now?
We issued 2,400 visas last year to business, investors, and entrepreneurs. Of that number, they brought in $1.6 billion and created 12,000 jobs.
What's the minimum amount of money an entrepreneur must have?
Well, the investor has to have a minimum of $500,000 of his own net worth and be prepared to invest $250,000 for a minimum of 3 years. 19 came in under that program. But by and large, the majority of the business and entrepreneurs have to have a business experience that is knowledgeable and useful.
You keep an eye on them.
Yes, we're monitoring that. Not only do we, but the provinces, who are the ones that accredit these businessmen, also will follow through, because they must first receive the certification of the province before we will accept them as businessmen.
This is a new provision in that scheme, is it?
Yes, and we're monitoring them very, very closely to see how useful it is. In fact, the program is so beneficial that we're going to be adding to it and bring in 4,000 or 5,000 this year under the program.
It's not just a question of bringing in the money, putting it in the bank, and coming in again.
To the contrary, because only 19 of the whole group of 2,400 fell into that category. The balance were people that have come here to create a job for themselves or create jobs for other Canadians.
Yeah, we used to have all kinds of other rackets too, with which I won't bore you, all my listeners, because they've had me talk about them before. I'm going ahead with, oh, good. Go ahead, please.
Okay, Mr. Weiner.
Present here, listening.
Mr. Webster introduced the question of the family class and suggested that these people were coming in on the basis of one person in the country without any evidence at all of their ability to contribute to our society. And in response to that, you said that they could bring in spouses and children and parents over 60. As a matter of fact, the problem is that since 1978, they've been able to bring in parents whatever their age, and the parents could bring with them all of their dependent children under 21 without reference to the capacity of any of them, parents or children, to contribute to Canada.
Well, that's a Canadian citizen. My information, and I could beg to be wrong, I'm certainly not infallible, is that a person living here has the right to sponsor his dependent parents over the age of 60, but a citizen can bring in any parents of any age.
The landed immigrant can do that, but the important part is that the citizen can bring in parents whatever their age.
Yes, I did
all
say.
Their children. Now,
yes, I did say that, of course.
Yeah, but you didn't say that. But it's important to understand that under that basis, that we're bringing in all kinds of people without reference to their ability to contribute.
Well,
then Mr. Webster spoke to you about independent immigrants, and you said that your government had reinstituted the entry of independent immigrants, which is true. But at the same time, you raised the criteria for the entry of those independent immigrants by 40%. And you imposed a restrictive occupations list, which makes it extremely difficult for independent immigrants, even with family in Canada, to come into the country. So on the one hand, you have the family class who come in without any check at all, and on the other hand, you have people with family in the country who are educated past age 21 who can't make it because of the hurdles that are there.
Let me just comment in a general way that somebody that goes in to sponsor their parents, be they a permanent resident or a Canadian citizen, understands the quality of their sponsorship. They understand the responsibility that they're coming forward with. The number of years in some provinces is up to 10 years where they'll have to put their name on the line and support their parents or family. And that's a consideration. On the other hand, the reference being made to independent immigrants, which indeed the previous government closed down, we can at least point to thousands that have come in out of that program. We're constantly reviewing it, and obviously as we go forward to higher levels of immigration, if that's what the country wants me to do, and we'll know after a process of consultation, then we could play with that. I'm quite willing to look at the numbers back and forth.
This is all very nice and time-filling, but you didn't respond to what I said.
No, what you said, Charlie, was that he was putting restrictions on the entrepreneurs but not on the others. Is that what you're saying?
Putting restrictions on the independent applicants and making it difficult for independent applicants, even if they have family in the country, to get in.
Charlie will know that this year I'm going to be bringing 125,000 immigrants to the country. What I'm doing to build that 125,000...
It's not dealing with the question I was raised, Mr. Weiner.
Charlie has a wide knowledge and a grasp of the field. He was appointed by the previous government, and indeed that previous government never listened to Charlie. I'm happy to listen to him, and I'll be very happy to share all kinds of experiences with him. But the clarification he wants is not as helpful to every listener that's watching right now.
Thanks, Charlie. Go ahead, please.
Need assistance? Dial.
Well, that's a good call.
No.
That wasn't an immigrant, was it?
Hopefully not.
Go ahead, please. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good afternoon, gentlemen.
Good afternoon.
I hope the government is going to act quickly on its immigration policy changes to allow bona fide, employable, skilled labor into the country, as opposed to allowing so many immigrants in that are not here legally. What is the government going to do about these people, and how quickly are they going to process them?
most immigrants that are in this country are here legally, because when you look at the build-up of the numbers that have taken place in recent years, they've all come through the legal means. And I would only want you to reflect on the fact that these are the people that are contributing enormously to our society. They're the ones that are creating jobs and increasing the demand for goods and services. Michael Wilson describes a country of some 35 or 40 million people would be beneficial for us. Jimmy Hawkes and his committee agree. Now, if we're going to go to those numbers, it's going to take more than 125 new immigrants a year with an outflow of 50,000. 75,000 new immigrants is a spit in the bucket. So what we want are people that are going to come here with their vision and their vitality to contribute to the continued growth of this country.
What's the actual cost of the social services, medical coverage, housing, and support that must be given to these new people who have been coming in droves?
Yes, I'd like to know that myself.
That's a good question.
It's a very good question.
Montreal alone says it was costing $40 million or something.
And what is the benefit from what is being produced by these people once they come here in terms of the contribution they make to the society? I mean, we would have to go into an examination of not only what it costs us, but what they contribute, which far outweighs what it costs.
There are instant, immediate costs, though, because you must give them medical coverage, correct?
Well, it's greater or lesser in some provinces. Quebec and Ontario offer immediate medical attention. Others provide emergency attention.
I see. But what's your budget for emergency help?
Well, that's the delivery of the health service is provincial, but we do invest about $110 million in terms of assistance, adjustment assistance programs.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, I'm a young Canadian caller. I'd just like to say I'm pretty furious about the way Mr. Weiner here's saying about letting these people in when there's Canadian people out there that don't even have jobs, and us taxpayers are paying for these people, you know, to...
That may be a short-sighted complaint, Mr. Weiner, but it's a very common complaint.
You see, I just don't understand why you people are letting these people in.
Well,
thousands of them in, and there's, you know, Canadian people that don't even have jobs.
I appreciate your concern, and I think that's part of the old hidden agenda where people felt that immigrants took jobs. Why don't you look at some of the current data, studies at Simon Fraser University, at Western University, our own studies, that show the number of jobs that immigrants actually create, the kind of tax dollars they contribute, the fact that they're the ones buying services and goods in the community.
Yes, but you're saying you're letting in refugees. These people are basically they're not very educated. They don't have very much knowledge. Now, how do you expect these people to give something to us?
Look,
I can't understand that.
Look, my father was a watchmaker. I wasn't born into a family of judges and jurists, and I can tell you that I'm proudly today the Minister of Immigration. I don't care where the people have come from, be they rice paddies of Laos or farms of Eastern Europe or wherever, their children will succeed because they have the right vision and vitality. They've got the winning spirit. Come with me to the universities and see who the achievers are.
More with Mr. Weiner after the break. Mr. Weiner, it has been put to me by cynical political people that ethnic immigration is encouraged at times for the sake of political support. Would you agree that that has existed in the past?
Well, it's hard not to reflect perhaps on that as being an aspect, but I am proud to say that we now have an immigration policy that does not discriminate, does not have quotas, and hopefully that when people meet the criteria, no matter where they come from, they'll be welcomed aboard.
Go ahead, please.
Good evening, gentlemen. I am a Canadian married to a Filipino lady. We have been attempting to have her niece brought over here from the Philippines as a nanny housekeeper. We find that if she were in Hong Kong or Singapore, she would be available to or able to come here within 2 months. From Singapore, you're looking at a year to a year and a half.
Well, we've got to come clean. And a niece doesn't meet the criteria. And in spite of the fact that you wanted to be a nanny housekeeper, there are some definitions to what a nanny housekeeper is. There's some previous experience that we look for. And unfortunately, this is one of those gray areas where a person that obviously doesn't meet the criteria is trying to come in through another route.
Is there a difference between Hong Kong and the Philippines?
No, it would be the same, that the program for nannies and housekeepers is the same. And sometimes people that don't meet the criteria dead on are trying another route.
Go ahead from Kamloops.
Yes, good afternoon. You spoke of sponsorship before. family member can sponsor another family member.
Yes, I did mention that.
I don't know if the taxpayers of BC are aware that a family member can be on welfare in this province and sponsor an immigrant.
Sponsorship doesn't really mean anything, does it? You merely sign the form.
It's a guarantee that you're going to be able to support that individual, and you put yourself on the line.
Well, if they can't support that individual is put on the welfare rolls with them.
Well, I don't want to talk about a specific case here, but I think that basically we look for a sponsor that can support the family
I know,
member.
and I've known of many cases where that has happened. Thank you, ma'am, for telling me. Go ahead from Nanaimo.
Yes, I was born in Canada, and I moved to the United States when I was 30. Now, 26 years later, my mother is 80 years old and in need of my care, so I had to give up my job and bring her. She was down with me for the winter, and I filed for my immigration papers, but they didn't get processed in time. And I brought her back up here with my car, and I got a very unwelcome greeting, as though I was a criminal bringing my car in.
But did you bring your mother in?
Yes.
And you're okay now?
Well, I'm here, but I haven't got my landed immigrant papers. They didn't finish them, and so they made me feel like I was coming in here illegally. And
no, you just got to go through the system.
You left the country for a number of years. Your return was undocumented, and while we'd be delighted to have you, you do have to give us the opportunity of examining the case thoroughly.
Go ahead, please.
Hello. I'd like to say that I am still livid about the Tamils coming off a ship off Newfoundland and lying. And when they lied, then they should have been sent back and not given a chance to go to Montreal or Toronto, as some of them chose. And they get a year for a hearing. In that time, the women who weren't pregnant when they arrived here could be pregnant, have a Canadian child, Canadian-born child. My great-grandfather was born in Oshawa in 1835, and his parents came here before that.
Never mind, you made your point. What do you say to it?
Mr. Weiner, you're trying to say, what I'm hearing from you is get rid of the Canadian-born people and bring in more unskilled people. I don't understand why you think they are bringing money into this country. I know they eat fruit and rice and stuff.
Hold on, ma'am.
I didn't talk about immigrants bringing money into the country. I talked about people that came here who have the vision and the vitality. They have the winning spirit. They want to start a job. They want to get a job, create jobs for others. What you were saying to me is that at the time the Tamils arrived, and they were only 155 out of 18,000, because you could focus on any one of the people that came by boat, by train, by car, by truck, you wanted me to break the law. We had a law in place in this country. The law said that everybody that came here is entitled to an oral hearing in front of an independent tribunal.
That's the one you're going to change.
That's the one we're changing. Well, we're changing law.
Yes.
Yes, we're changing the cumbersome system to a simplified, expeditious system. But I had to work with what was in place. There's a Charter of Rights and Freedoms. There's a Supreme Court decision. All that was here with me.
I know, and once you change it back to no appeal up to the federal court, the Charter of Rights will knock it down again.
Well, I'm not a lawyer, so I can offer a number of suggestions that I think will be very helpful to clear up our system. And
I'm merely making a prediction, having watched the Charter of Rights in action.
I hope we'll both be there to observe it.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, sir. In reference to the
carry on
coming into Canada, I feel it's most important that these people adhere to the regulations as we have them in Canada. A week and a half ago, we had a group of people approach our City Hall members, the alderman and the mayor of this city, and called them racists because they wouldn't accept our bylaws in reference to housing. And to me, the most important thing is that these people, when they come to Canada, accept our ways and our laws.
Look, everybody that immigrates here accepts our laws, and the immigrants and refugees are not the ones causing trouble. Ask the police chief of the Montreal urban community, who tells me that the new refugees and immigrants do not cause any problem. We have to know that everybody has the same rights when they get here, and while I did say that that group of Chileans that were carrying on a hunger strike in Montreal were not helpful, it wasn't beneficial, I said you can't hold the country hostage, that is understandable.
Now, I hate to finish on this note, but you're attempting to embarrass me now, I understand, Mr. Minister.
I wouldn't do that to you, sir, but what I have done, because it's within my power, sir, whereas one Jack Webster, a loquacious individual of national repute, has been duly found guilty of overstaying as the law at a time, id S. Post 65, and whereas he has continued to shock the airwaves with his non-stop allocutions beyond this authorized stay, the aforementioned Jack Webster is hereby ordered deported to a contiguous territory, hereafter referred to as Salt Spring Island. This deportation order shall come into force following the 31st day of May, Anno Domini 1987, by the powers conferred on me by the Immigration Act. Due to strong representations from the Scottish Open Line Broadcasters Association protesting your possible return to that country, the government is obliged to banish you to the aforementioned Salt Spring Island. Permission to return to the mainland can only be granted through petitions supported by Vancouver's television audience. And I've signed this the 23rd day of April, Gerry, Weiner, Minister of State for Immigration.
Order of deportation ex officio. Thank God it's ex officio. Aforementioned Salt Spring Island. That was unfair, but I accepted with grace and favor and a certain amount of sentiment. Normally I don't take piola from cabinet ministers or anybody else. That's it, Mr. Weiner. You're certainly a good talker. You're certainly a quick talker. I'm glad to know you're going to reshape the Immigration Appeal Board. I'm glad to know you're going to attempt to shorten the incredible, tortuous lengths of time it takes to establish refugee status, and that you are not, as such, a bleeding heart.
No way.
And thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And I shall be back with my deportation order after the break. I can tell you quite honestly, which is not unusual from me, that the greatest number of requests I've had for a Best of Webster repeat is the one with Dr. Helen Caldicott, the incredible Australian evangelist for peace. Dr. Helen Caldicott of the Physicians for Social Responsibility. I've read your book, most of your book, Missile Envy, and I want to go straight to the point about your devastating description of your interview with the man who's in charge of the buttons, Reagan. Was he that bad? Tell me.
Yeah, he's one of the least intelligent people I've met in 20 years of clinical practice. I had to speak in almost monosyllabic language so he'd understand me. Every statement he made to me was factually inaccurate. He really doesn't understand this nuclear issue at all. He read to me from the Reader's Digest. He said, look, I took some notes before I came down. He reached in his pocket and he pulled a piece of paper out and said, people who work for the nuclear weapons freeze are either KGB dupes or Soviet agents. And I said, that's from the Reader's Digest. He said, no, it's from my intelligence files.
So it came from the intelligence to the intelligence files from the Reader's Digest?
Right.
He just said to you, you're either a dupe or a Soviet agent?
Yes, he did.
What did you tell him?
Well, I heard from his daughter before she took me in to see him that I was a communist. He thought I was a communist. So I told him I pray all the time. I really laid it on like a trowel. So afterwards he told his daughter he thought I probably wasn't a communist, but that I was just very ill-informed.
Yes, you do bring in a touch of religion in this book. You're not a fanatical evangelist for Christ, are you?
No, I'm a physician and I worship life. And so for me, life is the DNA molecule, it's reality, and that's God for me. And I've learnt to pray recently. I find some strength in prayer. There's something higher up spiritually, as all religions find. But I'm nothing. Gerry Falwell's the one who really worries me because he has such an influence on Reagan.
But develop a little bit of the fact that you said that every single piece of information he gave you in that 75-minute interview was wrong. Give me some examples.
Okay, well, recently he said, this isn't an example from my interview, but recently he said he thought submarine-launched ballistic missiles were recallable once they were launched. That's like getting a bullet back once you've shot it out of a gun. He said he thought that the intercontinental ballistic missiles are more dangerous than cruise missiles or B-52 bombers because only ICBMs carry nuclear weapons. As Time magazine pointed out, 27% of the strategic arsenal is carried on cruise missiles and B-52 bombers. There's a new book called Deadly Gambits by a Time magazine correspondent, Strobe Talbot, who said this man is ignorant, befuddled, he sits at his cabinet meetings going to sleep, and even George Shultz said the other day it's time the president got involved in making decisions about nuclear weapons and the Russians. He doesn't even make any of the decisions.
To get back to his, you almost made a clinical diagnosis of him. How would you describe him clinically right now?
He's clinically paranoid. Reagan.
In other words, he can only believe, he believes one thing beyond everything else, and that is his righteousness and his right to push the button.
Yeah, and that the Russians are totally evil, godless communists. He told me that. So I said, have you ever met one seeking some objective data? He said, no, he hadn't. And that's the definition of paranoia. Now, it fits in with what he believes in, and it's the Falwell belief. Falwell believes in Armageddon. He believes in Revelations, and that Armageddon will be nuclear war. And that when nuclear war comes, 1/3 of man with the mark of God on their forehead are going to go straight up to heaven, and everyone else is going to burn in the fires on earth. Reagan has said 11 times since 1968 he believes we are the last generation before Armageddon. He said it in People magazine last December, and that we are now in the end times, and that the Soviet Union is evil, not symbolically, but is the seat of all evil, the evil empire, and America's #1, all good. And America will destroy the Soviet Union in the nuclear war, and everyone who believes in God will be raptured up to meet Jesus Christ in the sky.
You're telling me that he believes that the Soviet Union is the classic Antichrist of Revelation?
That's correct, yeah.
But
so it's sort of, you know, about to come about. He has his finger on the button, and he said, when Armageddon occurs, quotes, we will be a part of paradise. That's what Reagan said.
So now we come to the very depressing situation, and I'm one of the guilty people too. I deal with nuclear disarmament issues as a matter which I know people want to hear about, but I'm not particularly fervidly campaigning for it. There is no hope. Right?
Well, the only hope lies in you and everyone else, and that means you have to change the priority of your life if we're going to survive. If your child, and I guess you have children or grandchildren, develop leukemia, what sort of time, money and effort would you commit to saving your child's life?
Mm-hmm.
Everything. It would totally and utterly change your life. Now, our children, 75% of them know they're not going to grow up, that they're going to be killed in a nuclear war, yet they see us acting like idiots, really, ignoring the threat. And they have a leukemia equivalent. And what we have to do if we want our children to survive is commit our lives and our total fortune to saving their life.
Let's look, first of all, at the Western allies. We know there's all kind of nervousness in Europe about the Pershing IIs and the cruise missiles. But you've got an entire parliamentary system in Western Europe which in the main backs the confrontation with the Soviet Union. How the devil do you change that?
The majority of people in those European countries do not back the deployment of cruise and Pershing IIs. In Holland, up to 80% of people don't back it. In West Germany, it's about 60%. In Britain, it's about the same. Do you know why the Allies support it? Because America says, as they do to Canada, if you don't take our missiles, we'll cut off trade. And they impose economic sanctions. I know that because I know some of the NATO leaders.
But surely you're suggesting that our leaders, whoever our Prime Minister happens to be at the time, or Thatcher, are not that stupid. Surely they must eventually come to a decision where they either go against the Americans and go in favour of the Russians?
Well, it's difficult, you see. No, it's not in favour of the Russians, it's in favour of life.
But as an advocate who is against Falwell, against clean Americanism, against the macho might of the United States, you must be reviled and hated and despised. I'm amazed you're not picketed in certain places.
Well, it's interesting. I get a lot of respect. I think it's because they think I'm English. I've gotten this Australian accent, but they think I'm English. And although they had a revolution against the English, they still have a great deal of admiration and fascination for them. And I can tell them anything and they tend to believe me.
Yes, I know, but do you see any hope?
Yeah,
I mean, real hope.
The 86
It's all very well for Cronkite to say he would lie down in front of a Russian tank. He never did that when he was on the air.
True.
He doesn't do it on PBS. Can you think of anybody in the American media who's going to come out and campaign for unilateral disarmament?
Most people haven't got the guts. Most people in the military haven't got the guts. Most people in the American political scene don't. Rickover. Fill the seas up with nuclear weapons and submarines. He retired. Actually, he was kicked out. The first thing he said was that if he had his way, he'd close down all the nuclear power plants, which he helped to erect, and sink all the submarines in the oceans, the nuclear submarines. I mean, they're really pathetic.
Well, it's the
these
same
characters.
as all these Canadian admirals or generals I've had on recently. They're great peaceniks now. Where were they when they were in power?
Well, see, men tend to lack guts. Women have a lot of courage because we have the babies, and we would die to save our children. The power of a woman is like a lioness to protect her cubs. An aroused woman is unstoppable. But the men seem to need approval from their peers. They're like little boys.
Well,
right?
don't give me the psychological stuff. I don't believe that's really the answer at all. Let's go to the Russian side of the counter. Have the Russians ever suggested, do you think the Russians appreciate the same thing, that their people know about it, and that they might campaign or lead the way in unilateral disarmament? Because that would certainly disarm the Americans.
It would be a fabulous thing to do. But they're sort of macho too. I mean, they practice pre-nuclear thinking. It's what Einstein said. He said the splitting of the atom changed everything, save man's mode of thinking. Thus we drift towards unparalleled catastrophe. The Russians are stuck in the Second World War. They remember Hitler. They lost 20 million people. 72,000 towns and cities were razed. They remember that. And so they practice pre-nuclear thinking in the nuclear age, as do the Americans. So they're both like 7-year-old little boys in a sandbox arguing about who's got the biggest missile. It would gouge out a crater half a mile wide and 300 feet deep, so that everything in that volume would be converted to radioactive fallout, be pulverized, millions of tons of rock injected into the stratosphere and troposphere, where it would descend as radioactive fallout. Every person out to a radius of 6 miles from the epicenter would be vaporized. And what I'm really saying to you is that if you love this planet, and I'm deeply in love with it, and you watch the spring come, and you watch the magnolias flower, and the wisteria come out, and you smell a rose, you will realize that you're going to have to change the priorities of your life if you love this planet.
Well, Dr. Helen Caldicott, you are an Australian. You haven't even lost your accent. How long have you been in the States?
About 7 years.
Can I ask how old you are?
Yeah, 46.
Many children?
3.
3 children. Okay, give me the time clock. There's no questions I have to ask you. It's also bleeding depressing. Give me the time clock and paint for me, although we've seen If You Love This Planet. We thought it was fantastic, and we've got more gruesome pictures we can show from it at any time. Give me the time clock and Armageddon.
Okay, well, during the years of détente, when Russia and America were relatively friendly, the clock on the bulletin of the atomic scientist stood at 9 minutes to midnight, midnight being Armageddon. Last year it was moved to 3 minutes to midnight. I think since the election of Reagan and the ascendancy of Richard Pearl, it may move to 2 or 1 minute to midnight. It's very close. The weapons Reagan is building, if we don't stop them being built, cruise missiles, Pershing IIs, MX Trident II, will make nuclear war a mathematical certainty. So we're as close as that.
Why will it make it a mathematical certainty?
Well, okay, there's a man here...
Forget accidents for the moment.
Okay.
Why a mathematical certainty?
No, you can't forget accidents. What is happening is the Pershing II is to be used for decapitation of the Soviet leadership. That means kill them before they press their button. It hits Moscow in 6 minutes. In 6 minutes, there's no time to make a human decision whether or not to press their button. So they're going to computerize the button, whereby the computer by itself presses the button. There's a man at the university here called Professor Michael Wallace, a professor of political science. He says that during a time of heightened international tension, because of the risk of decapitation and this automatic button pressing called launch on warning, there will be a 50% chance of nuclear war with international tensions lasting 13 days like the Cuban Missile Crisis. A 50% chance of accidental nuclear war with an international crisis lasting 13 days.
Let me go over that. I know about launch and warning. This calls for launching nuclear weapons and warning that attacking weapons are on their way.
Right.
Now, you're going a step further than that. You're saying that it'll be computerized for a 6-minute attack to decapitate the Russians in their strongholds in Moscow, and that decapitation attack could be done by a computer under certain conditions of tension.
The decapitation attack, the Pershing II, isn't done by a computer. That's done by man. But because the Russian leaders are scared they'll be killed before they have a chance to press their button, they'll computerize their button. So if the satellite detects the attack coming, the Pershing II coming, and radios back to the computer in Moscow, the computer automatically presses the button. But the trouble is, the computers keep making mistakes. There are 151 serious errors in the computer system in an 18-month period. Last year, 255. The number of computer errors is increasing. One error lasted 6 minutes in November '79 when someone plugged a War Games tape into the fail-safe computer and it said, "We're under attack." Put the whole Western world on red alert for 6 minutes. The men in the missile silos put their keys in the locks ready to turn them to launch the missiles like in the day after. 3 squadrons of B-52s took off heading towards Russia. At the 7th minute, they had to notify the president, but they couldn't find him. We were 13 minutes from nuclear war, November 79. But if it only takes 6 minutes to hit Moscow, the Pershing II, and the button is computerized and the computer makes a mistake and the error lasts 6 minutes, that's the end of the Earth.
And there's no avoiding that.
No.
There is no way to avoid that happening.
That's what the new technology means, and that's why I tell you that the new weapons that are being built by America and Canada will, if we don't stop them, make nuclear war a mathematical certainty. When? I can't say.
You're talking, of course, in our participation in doing the brain of the cruise missile, which is a sneak attack job. But then, if I were a right wing, if I were Gerry Falwell or some old right winger on the right, I would say, better we survive something by attacking them with the secret weapons, the Pershing II and the cruise missile, before they even have time for a computerized response.
Okay, well then you don't understand nuclear winter. Carl Sagan and his colleagues have done recent studies to show if you take only 1% of the nuclear arsenal of the United States of America, as the cities are bombed, and the cities are full of toxic chemical facilities, plastics containing cyanide, oil refineries, liquid natural gas facilities. As the cities burn, a huge cloud of toxic black radioactive smoke will rise into the air and over weeks cover the Earth with a cloud so thick it will block out the sun for up to 1 year. Temperatures will fall to minus 55 degrees Fahrenheit. It will be pitch black in the middle of the day, only you won't be able to see the stars. The plants will all die because they need the sun to survive. And we and the animals will freeze to death in the dark. It's called nuclear winter, and it is predicted that 1% of the arsenal of the United States of America could destroy possibly every organism on Earth, like billions of years of evolution. So if you have a sneak attack on Russia, and you fight and win this nuclear war that the Pentagon's planning to fight and win, you would produce nuclear winter and destroy life on the planet.
It's so depressing you can't think about it, because as you tell me all these incredibly horrible things, first of all, I suppose that there's no hope of survival, even of cockroaches, after a total nuclear war.
That's what we think now, yeah.
Not even a cockroach will survive.
Mm-mm.
And how long will it take us all to vanish? Will it all be instantaneous, or will it be weeks and perhaps months?
Well,
for
America's
some?
got 30,000 bombs, and Russia's got 20,000. There are only 200 major cities in Russia and 200 major cities in America. So most of the cities of the Earth will be destroyed, like in Canada, America, Russia, China, Europe, England, India, Vietnam, Korea, Australia, New Zealand, the Philippines, Guam, Hawaii, and then some more, because they all contain very important strategic facilities to both superpowers. So that most people will die instantly, but people in Africa and Central and South America will die over time from radiation sickness. Their hair will fall out, they'll vomit, start having liquid diarrhea and bleed to death. And as this black cloud covers the Earth and the temperatures start falling, snowstorms raging across the planet, huge tidal waves coming in from the coast, people will drown, they'll freeze to death, they'll die of thirst because the fresh water will be frozen, there'll be no food to eat, and over probably, I don't know, several months, most, if not everyone, will be dead, and over a year all plants will be dead, even the algae in the oceans, the fish in the sea, the whales, everything.
International conditions have improved slightly since then, thank God. Back after the break. I had Morgenthaler a week ago. Tomorrow I have an American spokesman for pro-life, also the executive director of the National Association for Gifted Children, a woman by the name of Joyce Gentune, and A-Bomb Sage, Students Against Global Extermination. Looks like a pretty busy program tomorrow at 5 p.m. precisely.